Hello everyone! Clorinde, the strongest champion duelist in Fontaine, is one of the 3 new characters coming out in patch 4.7. Out of the 3 characters, I'm the most excited about Clorinde. Her animations are one of the best I've seen in Genshin, and her gameplay looks extremely fast-paced and fun. So without further ado, let's get right into explaining her initial kit. As always, remember that this is very early information, so very subject to change. Clorinde is a 5-star Electro sword user intended to be an on-field main DPS. She is Uxia aligned and has a crit rate ascension. Her kit revolves around Bond of Life to deal primarily normal attack damage. Sounds very similar to Arlecchino, but as you'll see, Clorinde's mechanics are quite a bit different. As a character that primarily deals normal attack damage, it makes sense to look at her normal talent first. The scalings are shown here, but you can actually safely ignore them. Wait, what? That doesn't make sense, right? I just said Clorinde mostly deals normal attack damage. Well, everything will make sense when you look at her skill, which is where the majority of Clorinde's kit lies. This is yet another skill with a lot of words that make it look very confusing, but I'll simplify it and explain the key details so you can see that Clorinde's skill is pretty straightforward in practice. When you first press Clorinde's skill, which has a 16-second cooldown, she enters an enhanced state called Night Watch, which enhances her attacks for 9 seconds, similar to how Ayato's skill functions. In this state, all of her attacks are considered normal attack damage, which is why we can ignore her normal talent. While in Night Watch, Clorinde's normal attacks become extremely quick pistol shots, which periodically trigger the Uxia aligned arc damage. When she has less than 100% Bond of Life, these shots pierce and give 35% Bond of Life. When she has greater than or equal to 100% Bond of Life, these shots actually deal less damage. So you want to stop normal attacking once your Bond of Life goes over 100%. Normal attacking isn't the only thing Clorinde can do under the Night Watch enhanced state. Clorinde can also press her skill again to perform a lunging attack, similar to Xiao's elemental skill. This lunging attack has 3 levels based on the amount of Bond of Life she has, with each level increasing the skill's damage, AoE, and healing. The important thing you need to know is that you only want to use her skill at its highest level, which is when Clorinde has greater than or equal to 100% Bond of Life. At this level, her lunging attack does the most damage and heals HP based on 120% of Clorinde's current Bond of Life. This functions to get rid of the Bond of Life you accumulated from your pistol shot normals. So, Clorinde's playstyle consists of normal attacking in her enhanced state to gain Bond of Life, then spending it when she has enough Bond to perform the strongest version of her lunging attack by pressing her skill. Lastly, while under the Night Watch state, Clorinde's HP can only be healed from the healing of her lunge attacks. Any healing she does receive in her enhanced state gets converted to Bond of Life in a 1-to-1 ratio with her A4 passive. Like Arlecchino, this is to ensure that her kit properly functions with Bond of Life. However, unlike Arlecchino, Clorinde can still get healed by her teammates when she's not in her enhanced state, for instance if she's off-field. Her A4 passive I mentioned also has a second part to it. When Clorinde has greater than or equal to 100% Bond of Life and it increases or decreases, she gains crit rate. She naturally stacks this herself when using her level 3 lunge attack, so this just gives 20% crit rate, which is pretty nice. That was a lot of info on her skill, and I want to sum it up again with a more practical view. You first use Clorinde's skill to enter the Night Watch enhanced state. To maximize her damage, you want to normal attack when you have less than 100% bond, and skill when you have over 100% bond. So if you start at 0% bond, one normal gives you 35, the second gives you 70, and the third gives you 105% bond of life. Now you can press your skill to perform the strongest lunge attack. This heals based on 120% of your current bond of life, so 120% of 105% equals a healing of 126% of Clorinde's max HP. Most of this goes to clearing your 105% bond, so you're left with about a 20% max heal every skill. Then you can repeat this cycle of 3 normals into a skill. Within the 9-second duration of the Night Watch enhanced state, you can fit a total of 6 of these. So within one rotation, Clorinde heals herself to full and even more, making her very self-sufficient. Now you may have noticed that all of the multipliers on her skills hits are fairly low. Sure, Clorinde attacks fast so she gets a lot of them in, but if all she had were her skill multipliers, Clorinde's damage would be pretty bad. However, her A1 passive makes up a very big portion of her damage and is very important to her kit. When Clorinde or any of her teammates triggers an electro-related reaction, any of Clorinde's attacks that deal normal attack damage in her burst are increased based on 17% of her attack for 15 seconds. This buff can be stacked up to 3 times, and the max buff that can be obtained is a 1530 damage increase. To max the buff, 3000 attack is needed, and this effectively serves as adding a 50% multiplier to each of your hits. So any percentage I listed on the skill description, you can just add 50 to each percentage to visualize her A1. And by doing this, you can see that this buff makes up a very considerable portion of Clorinde's damage because her individual hits have low multipliers. Activation of this buff is also very easy and pretty much guaranteed. It is not like Neuville's passive where you need to trigger different Hydro-related reactions. The way Clorinde's passive is worded, you can prac the same reaction 3 different times, such as Aggravate 3 times, and you'll fully stack the buff. Clorinde's ult is very straightforward. Other than being one of the coolest burst animations in the game, it just does damage, has a 15-second cooldown and 60 energy cost. Her burst is pretty much the same as Risley's and Wanderer's burst, where you'll want to use it whenever it's up either before or after you enter her enhanced state to not waste its uptime. One extra important detail, however, is that Clorinde's burst gives her 120% Bond of Life. This means that her burst gives another usage of her level 3 lunge attack skill, which is great since that attack has the highest multiplier in her skill. Lastly, Clorinde's special passive displays Fontaine specialty resources on your map. Very cool. Talent priority is very simple, level skill over burst as her skill makes up most of her kit. You can safely ignore her normal talent. Next, let's go over Clorinde's Constellations. C1. When Clorinde is in the Night Watch state, she can trigger 2 electro-coordinated attacks every 1 second whenever she deals electro-normal attack damage. Her coordinated attacks scaled off 30% of her attack and is considered normal attack damage. This means that she gets a lot of hits with her C1 and each of them proc her A1, which, like I mentioned before, is actually very important for her damage. Because of this, C1 is very strong because of the amount of extra A1 procs that you can get. Her C2 just buffs her A1 passive, increasing the max buff you can achieve and the scaling on it. Again, I want to emphasize that her A1 passive is very important, so this C2 is again an extremely strong constellation. The cap is still 3000 attack, but instead of adding around a 50% multiplier to each of her hits, with C2 you can add around a 70% multiplier. In addition, with C2, when Clorinde has max stacks of this A1 passive, she gains a bit of the resistance to interruption. C3 increases her skill by 3 levels. C4 increases Clorinde's burst damage based on the current amount of Bond of Life she has, so instead of using her burst outside of Night Watch, you're gonna probably want to use it while you have Bond of Life. C5 increases her burst by 3 levels, and lastly, C6. When Clorinde enters Night Watch, she gains 10% crit rate and 70% crit damage for 12 seconds. In addition, when she's in her enhanced state, Clorinde gets even more resistance to interruption and 80% damage reduction. And also with C6, a Glim Bright Shade can spawn up to 6 times, dealing electric damage, scaling off of 200% of Clorinde's attack. This shade can spawn when Clorinde's about to get hit, or whenever she uses a lunge attack skill. These effects will end when Night Watch is over, or 1 second after the last shade is summoned, and she can spawn a maximum of 6. So, in summary, C6 gives her crit rate crit damage, an extra 1200% multiplier, and pretty much makes her unable to die, with resistance to interruption, 80% damage reduction. So, you get C6, she can pretty much solo anything. Now let's go over her potential weapons, starting with her signature. 674 base attack gives a total of 64.1% crit damage and a total of 36 damage percent, since she easily meets the requirement of increasing Bond of Life. Simple signature and it's good, but I'm fully expecting it to get buff as there are other 5-star swords that perform very similarly, notably Mist Splitter and Harankipaku Futsu, as these weapons also give crit and plenty of damage percent. Other 5-star weapons that are also similar statistics are good options as well. For 4-star weapons, again similar to the 5-star weapons, Clorinde has a lot of usable options. Any weapon that gives useful stats like crit and attack are fine to use. For instance, Black Sword and Lance Roar are both solid 4-star choices. The one 4-star free-to-play option that I think is especially good is the Fontaine craftable Finale of the Deep. It gives her a lot of attack percent to help you reach that 3000 attack threshold to max her A1 passive, and she can easily clear the Bond of Life effect that comes with this weapon, giving even more attack. Artifact sets wise, she's a Bond of Life DPS, so the Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy is a no-brainer on her. However, I have seen some early calculations suggesting that Echoes is surprisingly very good on her, even potentially outforming this new Bond of Life set. Its strength does make sense as Echo's 4-piece effect pretty much acts the same way as Clorinde's A1 passive, which is the majority of her damage. Since it's so early in the beta cycle and Echoes is inconsistent with factors like ping, I won't confidently say that Echoes is definitively her best set. However, just keep in mind that it is a potential option for those who have actually chosen to farm this domain. Other than those 2 sets, 4-piece Glad and 2-piece 2-piece are decent options if you don't have anything else. In addition, if you decide to run a Furina team, you can consider also using Marachuse Hunter. However, Clorinde does gain 20% crit rate initially, so you may easily overcap with that extra crit rate with Marachuse Hunter. Stats wise, very simple. Attack Hourglass, Electro Goblet, Crit Circlet. Substats prioritize crit, attack percent, ER, then lastly EM if you want to play Dendro teams. EM being last and me not recommending EM Hourglass may seem a bit controversial, as EM is generally seen as an important stat for Dendro teams like Aggravate and Hyperbloom. However, unlike a character like Sino, Clorinde has no EM scaling and is heavily dependent on attack for her damage because of her A1 passive. In addition, Dendro teams will probably run Nahida, who already gives EM, so it isn't too important of a stat to build. For how much ER you should build depends on the team. Ideally, you want to burst every rotation because of its damage and because it gives Bond of Life, allowing you 1 extra level 3 skill in her rotation. And since her teams are likely to have Electro Resonance and can run Fischl, with a 60 energy burst cost, she can potentially run 100% ER and still be able to burst every rotation. If you do want some comfort, I would recommend around 110 and 120% ER. This isn't backed by any math, just my experience with other characters in similar situations. The general team rotation when playing Clorinde is pretty straightforward. First, you want to set up your support skills, then, if you have your burst, start off with your Clorinde burst to gain 120% Bond of Life. Then use Clorinde's skill to enter her Night Watch enhanced state. Immediately afterwards, you can use your skill because you have over 100% Bond of Life to perform a level 3 lunge attack. This clears your Bond of Life and also heals her. Then you normal attack 3 times, which gives you 105% Bond of Life, which allows you to use her level 3 lunge attack by pressing her skill, which again clears that Bond of Life and heals her. Then you can repeat step 5 until Night Watch is over. You can fit a total of 6 and 3 E's. Once her uptime is over, then you can just repeat from step 1. Very simple. Remember, just like Wander and Risley, you'll want to use Clorinde's burst outside of her Night Watch so you don't waste any of her uptime unless you have C4+, because you would want to take advantage of the extra multiplier based on her current Bond of Life. Before I discuss her potential team comps, I want to first discuss one factor that can influence her team building and even her rotation, which is healing. Unlike Arlecchino, who makes healers pretty much useless, Clorinde can normally get healed if she isn't in her enhanced Night Watch state. If she is in that state, the healing doesn't touch her HP but gets converted to Bond of Life instead. This mechanic is very interesting because it allows healing Clorinde during Night Watch to potentially buff her damage. The reason we normal attack during an enhanced state is to gain Bond of Life to use her level 3 lunge attack skill at over 100% Bond of Life, as it is the highest multiplier in a skill talent. Healing gives additional Bond of Life to Clorinde. With this additional Bond of Life, Clorinde can potentially use more level 3 skills and less normal attacks within the rotation, which is better for damage. However, this may require more precise timings of the heals and more work on yourself to track whether you can skill earlier than 3 normal attacks or not. So personally, I would still stick to the 3 normals and the skill to make the gameplay easier on you. In this case, the extra Bond of Life you would gain from healing only results in extra healing from using her lunge attack skill. Personally, I think that Clorinde's self-heal is big and comfortable enough for me to recommend healerless teams, allowing for another character who can buff or deal damage, or to potentially slot in a shield, as she doesn't seem to have resistance to interruption as C0. However, Clorinde's special synergy with healers is something to consider when team building. Finally, let's talk about her potential teams. As a 5-star Electro main DPS, Clorinde serves the same role as other Electro main DPSs like Keqing, Raiden, to a lesser extent Yai, Cyno, and Sethos. And due to the versatility of Electro, if you can just imagine any team you can think of for the other 5 characters and just replace them with Clorinde in that slot, you'll probably have a working Clorinde team. She's not restricted to a certain style at all and can fit into pretty much any Electro related team composition. You're going to have a lot of options, and since we're very early in the beta, I don't think it's very useful or accurate to say one team comp will be better than another since her numbers can be changed so easily. What I will cover though are the team comps that I personally think have the most potential and synergize well with Clorinde's initial kit, and give some example characters you can use. The teams I'm thinking of are Aggravate teams, Quickbloom teams, Electro-Charged teams, Furina teams, and Overload oriented teams. With Clorinde attacking so many times, I do think her kit makes a lot of sense in Aggravate, even though it may not be HOYO's design intention, as Clorinde has no EM scaling. Nahida is a no-brainer for the Dendro slot, and C6 Fischl is almost a must if you want Clorinde Aggravate teams to be amazing, since Fischl is just so strong in Aggravate. The last slot should be an animal slot like Kazuha for VV Shred. You can easily sub out Nahida for someone like Baju or Kurirara for defensive utility. You can also sub out Fischl for Kuki, though I would prefer replacing the Dendro slot. Quickbloom teams follow a similar team structure. You just need to replace the animal slot with a Hydra unit like Xingqiu or Yalan, and Clorinde should be able to proc their burst with her enhanced normal pistol shots. It's not worth focusing your Clorinde build to be EM, so the actual Hyperbloom cores aren't going to be doing an insane amount of damage. With double Electro, you'll primarily be taking advantage of the Quicken aura, just like Aggravate. Electro-Charged is going to be solid as well. You can go double Hydro and pairing Clorinde with Fischl or with Beidou in AoE situations. Since Clorinde's damage is considered normal attack damage, she should be able to proc Beidou's burst. Another option is to just go single Hydro and put in an animal unit for VV. Next, even though Furina teams would be versions of Quickbloom and Electro-Charged, I wanted to go over Furina teams on their own to discuss her potential synergy with Clorinde. Typically, C0 Furina teams basically require a team-wide healer to heal off Furina's HP drain and gain fanfare stacks. However, one normal non-speedrun C0 Furina team that doesn't have a healer is this Neuvillette team, which is considered one of his best teams. No healer is needed because Neuvillette is able to proc overhealing when he charged attacks, activating Furina's Endless Waltz passive to heal the team. And I think Clorinde is able to do the exact same thing. Every level 3 lunge attack skill she uses, which consumes her Bond of Life, will heal about 20% of her max HP. And she's doing 6 of these per rotation, and if you include her burst, 7, so she's constantly healing while she's on fielding. On top of that, remember that Furina's fanfare doesn't doesn't just give damage percent, but also healing bonus, further increasing Clorinde's self-healing. Because of this, Clorinde can easily help keep herself alive while proccing overheals, helping to keep the team alive as well without a healer. And I'm confident enough to actually recommend these healerless Furina teams, such as a Quickbloom version with Clorinde, Furina, Nahida, and Fischl. If a team like this happens to be manageable in practice, you'll get so much damage with every character dealing damage and Furina buffing them all. Lastly, I think overload-oriented teams, such as those with Chevreuse, will be pretty good as long as you don't get massively screwed by the overload knockback. You can go a team like Clorinde, Chevreuse, Fischl, and Xiangling to take full advantage of Chevreuse's buff to Electro and Pyro damage. You can even consider using C6 Sara instead of Fischl and attempt to buff multiple members, though this might be a bit more difficult to do in practice. Now you may be wondering why I'm suggesting solo Xiangling instead of someone like Bennett. Attack is important on Clorinde, so why don't I recommend just using Bennett? The reason is that Clorinde's A1 passive that contributes to a lot of her damage maxes out at 3000 attack. If you're building for attack in your gear and using Bennett, you're going to overcap because Bennett gives so much, and any attack over 3000 doesn't give you any more A1 passive damage. It only buffs your skill and burst damage, and remember, her skill multipliers are pretty low individually, so the value of getting attack over 3000 is not as big. Thus, to probably most people's relief, I don't think Bennett is that good of a character to pair with Clorinde. The last overload-oriented team I wanted to mention is Aggravate, specifically the Raiden national team, which is pretty popular. If you just put Clorinde in Raiden's place, she'll pretty much do the same thing. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover about Clorinde. With the current version of the kit, Clorinde looks pretty solid. If you compare her with the other Electro main DPSs in the same teams, she's looking to perform on par, if not a little bit better than the Electro main DPSs we have currently. So at the moment, nothing game breaking, just solid enough to clear any content like most limited 5-star DPSs in this game. Remember, this is just the first version of Clorinde's kit, so it will likely get changed. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised to see some slight buffs in the future, because from current team DPS estimates, it looks like she can afford to get some slight number increases. Overall though, I don't have any major complaints unlike another 5-star character at this time. Her damage is perfectly fine, animations are amazing, and her gameplay looks very exciting, so I can't wait to see what's in store for Clorinde in the near future. Hope this initial overview and analysis on Clorinde's kit was helpful to you all. Leave any questions in the comments and I'll try to clarify anything. Drop the video a like or sub to the channel if you like this type of content, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.